Já estamos de regresso. No painel anterior, abordámos.
And we are back. In the other panel, we talk about all the barriers that the clubs have nowadays in football, and with that reflection with the cultures and how we behave and how the behaviors can be a great behavior, although they're not international barriers. And now let's go to traditional clubs versus will the clubs become multi-millionaires? And now we will go through the football a little bit around the world. And now we have a shock in the traditional structure in the recent investment groups. This is a central topic for the discussion in the presentation. That's football is now more international, and how will the clubs transform in multinational enterprises? If this is a question we're going to try to understand with the next speakers: Jordan Gardner of the 21st Group, Luís Vicente, German Amex Capital, then Michael Broughtin in LLP and in Troels Management Director Holding, and now we have them here. We have Miguel Cardoso Pinto, the leader, and now please enjoy this panel.
Welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be here discussing this with you. This is a very interesting topic from my perspective. We know that the world is changing, football is changing, and I believe that we have a very insightful group here today with us to discuss a very hot topic that I believe that is very, very, very relevant at these days. Investors group are investing in football, and they are reshaping the industry. And so what we're going to discuss today a little bit with this group is, will football clubs become multinational or corporations or not? So to start the discussion, I would start with Luís and leveraging on your extensive experience in the football industry. I would like to understand how was the ownership and business structure of football clubs changed over the years, and what are the forces behind this change? So,
thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here as well in the stage together. I think that's a very interesting question, right? So I think we tend to forget that effectively football is a community, far and foremost, right? And is, in a way, is a community business. I think if we go back 100 years, a lot of community organizations, social responsibility, were effectively developing football clubs to take, time and give some, exercise and physical fitness to their workers and employees. I think that model evolved over time, as we know, but for many years fans were, and effectively that's the reason why we still have so many members, based clubs. So fans were effectively the owners, and the owners of the brand, the owners of decisions, and the owners of DNA. I think in the 70s and the 80s, right, of course, with the advent of, sports marketing and sports sponsorship, and basically with the big, development as well on revenues, but also on costs, so the models start to evolve. And effectively, clubs started to look at other forms of organization. You start to have the first, high net worth individuals, investing in clubs, and basically building, sometimes because they were fans of the club and wanted to help, some other times because effectively they wanted to build, their own personal brand or their own business brand. But effectively that model started to be, a more normal model. And lately in the 90s and the 2000s, effectively we got into, different models, and especially with clubs working together, right? So because today we talk a lot about multi-club networks, but effectively that model has been there for many years in different forms, because clubs understand that if they could work together, they could have some advantages, on players trading, on players development, on commercial, partnerships. And effectively, for instance, I remember when I got to Manchester City in 2009, Manchester City already had effectively 5 clubs that were part of a network, right? So not many people remember that. but effectively that already existed, so there was another club in Thailand, another club in Malaysia, another club in Japan, so there was that concept already. I think effectively when we start to have different kinds of investors, and so we started to have big multinational companies investing seriously in football. So we have, for instance, today Audi, Allianz, and Adidas, for instance, being shareholders at Bayern Munich. So even if they are minority shareholders, we have, of course, the advent of big personal projects from high net worth individuals, or even from sovereign funds. At PSG, at Manchester City, which clearly changed the dynamic. But you still had coexisting with that actually more traditional models like membership clubs, and as well, like when I was in Valencia, a club that effectively was owned by the club foundation, was still very loyal to how it was 100 years ago. I think today is very interesting dynamic because clearly football became an investable, asset. We all know that. I think there is today an immense number of new investors coming into the sport, which is, unbelievable. I think like in every business there is good investors and bad investors, or investors that come for the right reasons and the wrong reasons. But especially today, I think the dynamic is very important. Of course, a lot of these investors are coming into the sport because there is effectively problems. Again, the costs, have, basically scale enormously vertically. Revenue has not increased at the same pace. A lot of clubs have been overspending for many years, not managing their resources properly, and managing with emotion sometimes. And so I think that created actually a situation where a lot of distressed assets are on the market. And there is, of course, an appetite from a lot of investment groups to effectively come rebuilding this brand, stay for a medium, sometimes short term, build the value, and exit. I think this is not maybe the projects that football needs. I think we need projects that are more stable, and especially we need projects that can effectively change the dynamic, right? Again, we all know, any business, if I have a coffee shop, and actually my coffee shop loses 5,000 euros every month, right? One day I'll have to close it, right? Because it simply will not be worthy. That's the problem that we have in football, right? We cannot keep spending the amount of money you are spending. Again, you saw, of course, on the latest player transfer window, the amount of money that was spent. Again, just Premier League on his own spent more than 2 billion, in player transfers. Again, I say there is a big inflation at the moment. Again, some years ago, not many years, but some years, you could buy a player for 100 million, you'll be probably the best player in the world. Today, a regular player will effectively, be cost 100 million, which is a lot of money. I think, so something needs to be done. I think the multi-club networks model is a good model if it's also deployed on a good way. But especially, I'm also a big believer on projects that are combining entertainment and sports. Again, and sometimes you don't need to be the biggest brand in the world, or don't need to be in a top league. I think there is a project, for instance, I'm a big fan of, which is Hampton and Richmond, which is very much inspired by Ted Lasso's story and that incredible, content that Apple TV created. Actually, the owners are here today, and thank you for coming, guys. But also, I think, projects where fans and athletes can have a voice are essential today. Again, you've seen, for instance, Birmingham City, Tom Brady, very important NFL player, become an investor in a football club. You're seeing, a lot of projects, related with DAOs or crowdfunding. Again, for instance, Luís FC, good example, which is actually owned by 2,400 members that pay an annual subscription. So there is an interesting number of models that I think quite dynamic for the future of the sport.
A very interesting topic when we are discussing these investments, and it's because there's always a balance between what are the traditional values for a football club and the corporate objectives. And for instance, in the prior discussion that we had in this room, the people in the group were discussing the purpose of the football club. Jordan, from your perspective and experience, investments and the corporate influence impacting the traditional identity and the culture of football clubs, or what happened through these investments?
Yeah, I mean, as Luís alluded to, more sophisticated investors are coming into European football. They have for many years now. And I think the question is, do they understand and have the cultural sensitivity to react to the way the ecosystem is here in Europe? in my particular case, it's dealing with a lot of American investment groups who have invested in major sports in the United States. And you have an ecosystem with salary caps and wage constraints and single entity ownership, things that just don't exist here in Europe. And here in Europe, obviously, you have clubs that are over 100, 125 years old, incredibly passionate fan bases. I was at the Benfica game last weekend, and it was just incredible the passion that that supporter group has for that particular club, but that's obviously not unique to that club. So I think a lot of the conversations that I have, particularly with American groups, is how can we find that balance between understanding that, yes, football clubs need to be run professionally, and most investors are looking for some form of return on investment, but we have to be sensitive to the fact that these are cultural institutions in a way that they aren't in other places in the world. So we can talk about raising ticket prices. That's a super easy thing that we can laugh about in the US, saying, okay, I'm going to buy a football club in England and I'm going to raise ticket prices. Well, you can't really do that. I mean, you can do that, but the backlash you would get and all the negative attention you would get probably would not justify whatever incremental revenue you're going to get from that. You talk about what Chelsea had recently with, they were subsidizing away trips for supporters and the supporter buses, and they took that away. Massive backlash. But it's also not to say that you should run this club like a not-for-profit business, because I do believe any investor that comes into sport should be entitled to some return on their investment. But the question is, are there better uses of and better places to put your money if your sole motivation is profit? Possibly. But I do think investors are getting more sophisticated and trying to find that balance. I think you look at a Redbird Capital, they own Toulouse, and now they own AC Milan, and I think they look at things in a more culturally sensitive way, but it's still difficult. They had a difficult decision when they got rid of Paolo Maldini as their sporting director, and they got a lot of backlash for that. So I don't think there's one right answer, but to the point of this panel, I mean, I think these clubs are multinational corporations for the most part already, especially the big ones. It's happening already, and how can we do it in a sensitive way, and how can we help communicate properly to the supporters and the stakeholders in the ecosystem that, yes, we do need to treat this like a business. It should be run like a business, but not 100% in that way, so that every decision is entirely profit-driven.
Yeah, very interesting. And moving to Michael, and I believe following this topic, because it's very interesting, because on the football industry, we don't have customers, we have fans, right? So it's a little bit different. From your perspective, how can investment to support football clubs in increasing their fan base and also to increase the brand value of the club?
Well, it very much depends where in the football pyramid you are investing. So if you are going for a top flight club, we had an experience last year with Chelsea putting together a bid, and we spent a lot of time with the fan groups. And there were 3 bits of feedback that were consistent across the fan groups. It didn't matter which ones you spoke to. One was, every fan group wants hope. Right now, hope means different things. If you're a Luton Town fan in England right now, the hope is you play well, you hold your head up, but you'll probably get relegated. You're going to enjoy this year. For a Chelsea fan like me, it's, I want to be in Europe, I want to be in the Champions League, I want to win titles. I have no real hope this year, just to be clear. The second one is, the beer in my stadium is awful. Can you please change the beer? Yeah. By the way, when you change the beer, it will still be awful, so you got to be careful about that. The third one is, and this was remarkable, is the fan doesn't care about us, right? And so if you take that, I think I don't think that is a uniquely Chelsea or British thing. I think most club fan bases will say, the club tries to monetize me, they try to do this to me, they don't really care about my opinion, they don't listen to me. There are some very good reasons, which is if you've ever been a football club director and you've lost a match, it can be a pretty hair-raising experience walking back to your car. So there are some good reasons why there is this nervousness to communicate, but I would say that unless you understand that you need to have a fan or customer, consumer-centric business, you're going to struggle to make money in the future and get the returns you want. Right? Because what is it that they actually want? Yeah, they want to win. They want that hope. You need to put a product on the field of play. But I sit in a lot of these events, and you hear about, we're about community, we're building this, and I sit there and go, can you build community without communication? I was like, you're not communicating with your fans, so I don't know how you've got a community. And if you don't have that, you're not going to monetize it. So I would sum that up by saying I actually think there's an awful lot of opportunity if we can, as an industry, figure out how you do that. And I'm not going to say it's easy.
And Troels, moving to you and in line with what we are discussing in here, how do you see the role of this fan engagement that we are discussing and the community involvement in shaping the future of the football clubs? And how can these coexist with the corporate objectives from the investors?
Well, I guess, first of all, I consider myself more a fan than an investor. So I'm a little bit in between in the discussion. I serve on the board of a club on behalf of an investor group, but I was a long-time fan before I represented the investors. I think if you want the respect of the fans and you want to truthfully show that you're actually nurturing that community, which they've been a part of for a long time before you come in, and they will be most likely a part of a long time after you're gone, then you're going to need a credible story on how can you deliver the profit for the investors without damaging the club and all the values and all the things that means a lot to the fans in the community. And I think the places where we've seen things go wrong is the places where those two tracks are just way too far apart. And I think from our side, I mean, we're not trying to change too much, and then we have a longer term perspective. I think if it was so easy to go in and make big profits very fast in soccer, then I think we would see a lot more examples of it. I don't think very many of us can come up with even one. So I think aligning interests from fans to investors and not being naive around how quickly can you actually deliver something to the investors. If you don't have that, then you will struggle with your integrity and the respect of the fan base, which you ultimately still need if you want to run a football club.
And Michael, going back to you, how do you believe that investors group can help football clubs to achieve financial growth and long-term stability?
I mean, the first thing I'd say is don't just look at your Excel spreadsheet, right? So I've seen a lot of people look at football clubs and they come up with this wonderful model and they extrapolate forward. But of course, in Excel, you can make the number get to what you need it to be in order to justify what you want it to be. I think for me, the biggest thing, and what I'd love to see from those that are investing in and coming in from outside of sport traditionally, is actually question the business model. Like, I got asked a question on LinkedIn a couple of days ago about, well, digital monetization is where it's gotten to. And I said, well, yeah, based on a business model where you've sold your media rights and sponsorship is number one in your business model. Maybe you want to look at it through a different lens if you think that digital monetization is a route you want to go. You're just trying to layer a small piece onto an old business model. And it's a model that we've been using, again, I'm English, so I look through the prism of the Premier League, since 1992. I don't know about you, but I think the world's changed a fair bit since 1992, and maybe the business model should adapt to how the consumer is, the fan is today. They're still fanatical, right? But the way they want to communicate with you, the way you want to interact, the way they spend money has changed radically, to the point that I don't carry money. But you're still trying to sell to me the same way that you did sell to my dad in 1992. Well, that makes no sense to me, right? So I think for me, yes, you need to do all the smart things, right? We heard earlier this morning about MCOs and getting their player performance pathway and how you think about that and having alignment. Yes, how do you make sure your stadium works on a more efficient basis? Yeah, these are the basics, though. These things you have to get right, and we're not all getting it right. But I would really want external investors to sit there and say, we don't actually know what the question is, so let's figure that out before we come to an answer.
Okay. And Luís, and going back to you because I would like to go deeper on the multi-club ownership that you mentioned before, because it's increasing very strongly worldwide and every day more popular. From your perspective, and you mentioned some of the benefits. What are the benefits for not only for the investors but also for the clubs and the fans of the clubs that are being acquired? Can you go a little bit deeper on that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I think, first of all, there is, I think, probably the wrong discussion today about multi-club networks, right? So I think there's a lot of controversy at the moment. There's controversy from fans, there is controversy from the media, there is controversy from some of the owners that maybe also are not helping themselves with some decisions. But I think when you look at the principle of aggregation and effectively generating economies of scale, generating growth opportunities, generating effectively a much more global presence and this localized presence, again, are things that many other businesses are effectively deploying with massive success. So for me, where is the problem? I think today you have good success stories on some, but none of them is effectively doing a 360, right? So effectively, I don't think there is a single multi-club network today that effectively can generate the full amount of efficiency it could generate. So if you look at some examples, let's say, for instance, Red Bull, I was involved in the beginning on that project. Effectively, they wanted to promote a product, right? They wanted to build a brand. And nothing wrong about that, right? But effectively, they started like that, so the markets were effectively chosen because of the marketing reasons, not because of sports reasons. But effectively, they built a model that became one of the models of more success on player development, right? So if you look at the amount of financial resources that Red Bull generates every year with player trading, it's actually unbelievable. So again, they did something, right on a few areas. Again, they built, of course, a great media business as well around sports, and effectively as well football is part of their strategy. If you look, for instance, at Right to Dream, which today was here with us, in another panel in the morning, I think this is one of my favorites because they effectively prove that by a multi-club network, and actually by a multi-club network that borns from or comes from academies, right? Effectively, you can build a social responsibility model and a financial sustainability model, right? So for me, I think it's a good one. If you look at, there is other cases, even including here in Portugal, that have other clubs. But I think what we need to start talking is, okay, what a multi-club network needs to do. And I think maybe throwing 4 or 5 ideas on this. So the first one is effectively needs to be, or to amplify the global scale of the club or the clubs that are part of it, right? And I think today one of the biggest issues that you still have in football is the fact that the industry doesn't really know their audience, right? So, and again, the audience is global. Again, the club will know the 50, 40, 30,000 that come to the games, but not necessarily the ones, the millions and the billions that can be watched, by digital means or by TV. And I think effectively, if you have, let's say, a global presence by multi-clubs in different geographies, adapting to different cultures, different communication and more personalized strategies, you're definitely a winner. I think the second thing, you need effectively to build a good product on the pitch, right? Because this is football. The main product needs to be good, needs to be exciting, needs to be entertaining. And I think that, for me, is something that needs to happen all the time. The third one, for me, is actually the most important. It's about fans, right? And effectively, how can you, once and for all, get loyalty as something that works in the sport? I think if you go today to any club, and let's not talk about Portuguese clubs, but again, if you go to Real Madrid, as probably the biggest loyalty program in the world in football, they will have today under 1 million registered members, right? Which, again, if you actually think that you have maybe 1 billion fans, and let's not discuss the concept of fan at the moment, is effectively something that, for me, is a big staggering difference on where it should be. And I think, effectively, if you build loyalty for the fan, you'll have a very different loyalty than you have today. Because if you are a fan, and maybe you have invested 50 years of your time, supporting a football club, if you take the emotional pleasure that sometimes you get when your club wins, effectively, what are your return on investment, right? And what happens if you actually start losing your job and you cannot go to games anymore? Will the club actually give you the tickets for free? No, right? And I think, for instance, initiatives like happen here, with Continente and Liga Portugal on getting effectively, best pricing, on ticketing and so for every game in the Division 1 and Division 2 is great. I'll say the fourth piece is effectively how you can become storytellers, right? Because it looks sometimes that football and multi-club networks just focus on the 90 minutes of the game, while they should effectively be focusing on, 24/7, 365 of a full year. And effectively, sometimes fans and athletes are not used as content creators, but they are just part of a script that someone else is creating, right? And I think the most genuine stories I ever saw in football is effectively about fans, and stories that fans tell on the eyes of a fan. So I think we also need to change. And finally, the last is about financially and business efficiency, right? So, which I think we cannot keep losing the money that the industry is losing. So effectively, a good multi-club network should actually have an efficiency on costs and an efficiency on revenue.
Okay, so going back to Jordan. Jordan, as far as I know, you have been working together directly with clubs from different leagues and more or less competitive. And from your perspective, what impact does investor ownership have on the competitive balance within football leagues and competition? It would be my first question. And then how can governing bodies ensure fair play and competitiveness to ensure that...
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, the influx of capital into the sport has created more of a disparity between the biggest and the richest clubs and the medium or smaller clubs. I think there's a discussion about distribution of media rights and distribution of dividends from UEFA competitions, but at the end of the day, if you're a small club, you're a Luton Town coming up to the Premier League, you simply cannot compete with Arsenal and Chelsea and Manchester City. It just isn't possible. Now, we have mechanisms in place to try to level the playing field, things like financial fair play or profit and sustainability rules in places like the Premier League, but I think they, being completely frank, they're not particularly well enforced, and there is incentives for the richest clubs in the world to push the boundaries on those rules and regulations to try to spend more money. And how do we solve for that? I don't know if there's the right answer. I mean, basically the way I look at it is I think clubs would say, how do we generate more revenue? How do we sell more tickets? How do we sell more sponsorship? But for me, and Luís alluded to this a little earlier, we're asking the wrong questions. How do we control for costs? We're spending too much money. We're burning too much capital on player wages, on agent fees, on operations. We're just not running efficient businesses. And so I think the issue that I see is that no one buys a football club or becomes a director or CEO to make difficult decisions. They want to do it because it's fun, it's enjoyable, everyone loves football. But if you want to run an efficient business, a football club is a business, you have to cut costs. You might have to fire people. You might have to make unpopular decisions. And so I think more clubs need to take a little bit more of a ruthless approach when it comes to controlling for costs, even if there aren't things like American-style salary caps. So I think those are some ways that we can try to level the playing field. But the bottom line is, every league in the world, whether it's here in Portugal with Benfica, Sporting, and Porto at the top, and other clubs definitely certainly further down the food chain, Premier League's the same way. There isn't necessarily one right answer to that. We can distribute funds a little bit more. Clubs that sell players in a good clip can certainly bridge that gap a little bit. But the goal conceptually is financial fair play, but that's a totally separate panel to talk about.
So moving to Troels, and I would like to ask this question first to Troels, but then to everyone, and I would like to get your perspective on that. Looking in a 10 years period, will the football clubs become multinational corporations? And is that a good thing or bad thing from your perspective?
Well, if 8% of Juventus social media followers are Italian, I guess to some extent the brand and the business already is, and there's a panel here of various nationalities, so depending on how we define multinational corporations, obviously the sport is so global already. Whether you will then see more and more mergers and acquisitions, multi-club ownerships, meaning that there's an integrated value flow through clubs. across regions, I presume that will happen, especially if there will be an investor community that think it's a good idea. Whether it's good or not, that then I guess goes back to whether you're looking at it from an investor or a fan point of view. If I'm a fan of a small club in Denmark, and my place in the food chain is to send my best players, maybe at a little bit below market price, to a different club in the ownership, to a place where even maybe taxation is lower when you pay dividend out to the investors, that's not going to drive my loyalty as a fan. So I think it will. I think it's partially happened already, and I think it will continue. I don't think I'm in a position to determine whether it's good or bad. It's definitely not going to be good for everybody.
Okay, Michael.
I think Troels and Luís both said this, but from a fandom perspective, yeah, they're multinationals, but they're not as businesses, right? So fandom is everywhere, and maybe you want to call that followership rather than fandom, depending on where you're at. Your base of potential customers is very different today than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. I don't think the business has caught up with that. I think if I had a prediction for the next 5 years, it's that we still don't make that leap to becoming more international businesses. I think what you're more likely to see, and I think in England this year, you've had a crash course in reading balance sheets because of what Chelsea have done. And we've all had to learn, football fans have had to learn what an amortization is. I think in the next 5 years, you're going to see a lot more of explaining about structured finance, because I think you're going to see the financial profile of sports businesses change before the business of football clubs changes, if that makes sense. So yeah, you'll see preferred equity, you'll see mezzanine debt, you'll see senior secured notes, and people will all need to start learning what these really mean, because just the quantums of the numbers at top flight football are going to require different ways of thinking of finance. And it's weird that that's going to come before they go, wow, actually there's this massive audience out there that we should actually be building out a product that they really want to, let's be honest, buy from, so that we can generate the cash flows. And in the interim, they'll keep taking on more debt because the cost base, as Jordan said, is too high. So I think we're going to have a 5-year crash course in how to read a balance sheet and cash flow for all the fans before we get to what does a multinational football club look like.
I would add, too, that most people don't realize that football clubs are small cap businesses, even the biggest ones, in football. Compared to traditional multinational corporations, football clubs might have big visibility and large amounts of employees, but they're still small businesses. They really are compared in the rest of the scheme. So I think that's something not a lot of people think about.
Yeah. And probably I will add as well, I think, and resonating as well a lot with Jordan just said, right? So football has this immense emotional power, but effectively is a small business. And I think that's, for me, one of the most interesting paradoxes, of this industry. I think they are global businesses without having the capability of actually managing a global business, which is, I think, a very difficult situation. And so sometimes it's also unfair. Again, going back to multi-club networks, theoretically you can improve using a multi-club network if effectively you are brave enough to adapting and personalize that multi-club network to the different geographies and the different fan bases you are talking to. But I'm also hopeful, right? I'm hopeful that the industry will learn with mistakes. I'm hopeful that actually the industry leaders will understand what they need to do. I think there is today the advent of new forms of the sport, which I think will be much more dynamic, much more fit to purpose, and with the advantage of being able to be built into the modern world from scratch and from, let's say, initial base that can be workable in a different way. Again, I'm a big fan of women football. I think there is a massive opportunity there, and actually an opportunity to build a far better model, far better experience. Again, if today you go to a women's football game, it's a family experience. There is no violence. Everybody can go. It's fun. There is, a good environment, a good experience for everyone. You have a massive audience that is out there waiting to be conquered, waiting to be connected, waiting to, basically creating, a new form of the sport. The same thing with the amateur side of the sport, right? Again, we look a lot about professionals, but the amateur side for me has a massive opportunity. Again, football is the largest mass participation sport in the world. We don't talk as often about football as that. We talk about cycling or we talk about, running. But effectively, football has a tremendous power because there is billions of people that play the sport every day, right? And I will say that as well, the virtual side of the sport and all the opportunities that this could bring will become as well another opportunity to actually make things right. So I'm a big believer that we can actually make a far better business.
Okay, so I have perhaps a final question to everyone, because what I'm learning is that for investors, investing in football clubs, it's a small, they are small businesses. They are not the most profitable. So why do they invest in football at the end of the day? What they are looking for? I've heard fun at a certain moment of the conversation. But from your perspective, what are these investors looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think because of everything we talked about in this panel, there's opportunity. It's such an inefficient space. And I think people look at European football, a lot of Americans do, and say, how can we, for good or bad, put this in a mold of more commercialized business that we can, frankly, reap profits? And I think whether that's misguided or not, whether they take cultural sensitivities or not, you have a system of promotion and relegation. You have a system where you can develop and sell players. I mean, I think those things are attractive to potential investors. And it's fun, it's sexy to own a football club in Western Europe. It's very, I think there's always going to be a long list of investors that are interested in getting into the space. To Michael's point earlier is, can we hopefully educate them so that they come in and set themselves up for success and are, again, sensitive to the needs and the decisions they need to make to have success in this space.
Please.
Well, I think obviously there will be different motives for different investors. I think you see some investors where it's actually really investments that are happening. It's investors that like to build something and create a development. If you look at what Tom Vernon did at FC Nordsjælland in Denmark, not only did he acquire the majority of the club, he then also actually spent money afterwards, right? Mm-hmm. And when it comes to loyalty of fans, whatever happens or would happen with that investment, he would leave it in a better place, because he didn't just spend money on salaries, he spent money on the prereqs for performance, so facilities as an example, skills. So some investors will like to maybe protect something. We also, I guess I would say we on behalf of the investor group, thought of potential in building it and developing it. But also, well, if we didn't buy it, maybe somebody else would, and it was a little bit also of a Conor Moore, obviously, investment for a big part of the investment group. But on the opposite side, when it's in for profit, we already heard Jordan and I talk about this obvious challenges around creating profit and how tough the business is and how much capital it takes, right? If you come in for that reason alone, then I'll still say that then I wouldn't invest with that mindset, because I think it's too difficult to create quick profit in this industry right now. Mm-hmm. I would rather believe that long term I could maybe get profit if the investment mindset was to build something with a long term, effect, raising the value of what I acquired a stake in.
Yeah. Michael.
I mean, Jordan literally stole the words out of my mouth, because I like at the moment to refer to it as an inefficient marketplace. And if you're an investor, you're always looking for an inefficient marketplace. But I think that's only one side of the coin, right? The other half is, well, what actually is your fan base? What are you trying to achieve? Where is that going? Because if you ignore the emotion of sport, not just football, if you ignore the emotion of sport, you're going to get it wrong, right? It doesn't mean you have to make irrational decisions as a business owner, right? Actually, again, on the Chelsea process, I got asked about the playing squad. I said, well, I'm a fan. You can't ask me that question. I'm going to be irrational. There's a whole bunch of questions I can answer, but not about what the playing squad looks like. You need to put the right people in that place. But I think, again, I can see a lot of people looking around the world at the moment and seeing a bear market, and I'm still a bull on sports, partly because I think everything I've seen, and we saw a Web3 panel just earlier and whatever, everything I've seen from the next generation is they are consuming sport more often in more places in very different ways than ever before. And that gets me really excited about how do we tap into that and leave a better product at the end of the day when we're long gone for the next kids. And if you can do that, you're going to make money along the way.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I fully agree.
before we kicked out of here, because we are running out of time.
No, just very quickly to just say, I fully agree with Michael. I think, first of all, there is a massive untapped value. There is still a lot of things that the sport can evolve. So massive creation of growth, massive creation of potential. I think we need to take better care of the fans. We need to take better care of our brands. We need to take better care of our storytelling. And I think if we give ourselves time, because I think sometimes there is a hurry to make everything in a day, right? And Rome, as we know, was not built in a day. Nothing is built in a day. So, and I think having effectively a strategic vision for the sport for at least 10 years is fundamental, right? Because if you buy a club, you need to protect the DNA of the club, right? And you need to basically make sure that the club is better when you leave, right? So, and you need to make sure that you stay for the amount of time necessary for you to get the club right, make it more competitive, and being an example for the others, right? Because there's also one thing in this sport that I found it unbelievable, that everybody's fighting on the pitch. And because that fight is so big and so intense, nobody works together off the pitch, right? And I think we are all guardians, right, of this industry for the next generation, all of you as well. And I think we need to do a better job. But thank you for being here, and hope that you enjoy this panel.
So thank you very much. It was a pleasure. I would stay here 1 more hour discussing this. We started outside, and so it was very interesting. I thank you all for your participation. I thank you all also for being sitting here with us. And thank you, and see you next time.
Thank you.